24 we're actually going to handle together next week. I wanted to keep thematic elements together. Now, we will mention them at some point, today during today's sermon, because I do understand that the Bible is constructed in the order it's in for a reason. But for ease of teaching, we're going to handle 12 through 14 and 19 through 24 next week. Okay, so we'll handle that as a unit. So I'm not skipping it for any theological reason. I'm skipping it for preaching reasons. And we're going to come back to it, okay? Instead, what we're going to do, we're going to look at the biblically, monumentally significant event of Peter's denial of Christ. How do I know that this is such a significant event? Well, if you look in your Bible, the first four books of your New Testament are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, correct? We refer to them as the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are usually grouped together and called the Synoptic Gospels. The reason they're called the Synoptic Gospels is that they generally share structure and content. You can find parallel passages in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and sometimes when you find an event that is covered in two or more of those Gospels, sometimes it is actually clear that one of them has borrowed exact words from the other. That they're written so close together that if something was already written by one apostle, they just went ahead and put their verbiage in their own account. And sometimes it's partially identical with added information. Maybe Matthew focuses a little more on one thing than Luke does, and Mark focuses a little bit more on something than Matthew does, or one account's shorter, one account's longer, but they share a lot of the same material. And at the very least, a lot of the same events. John, meanwhile, is way out here on the other end of the field. Right? That doesn't mean that his is weird or his is wrong. Obviously, it's in Scripture. But John was written a lot later than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Right? John died in his 90s. And you can kind of figure, and this is what most scholars think, by the time John writes his gospel, everybody's already familiar with Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There's no reason to retread the same territory one more time. So John gives you events that, for the most part, Matthew, Mark, and Luke just don't cover. And they give you those events from John's perspective. Right? This passage is unique because Peter's denial of Jesus is one of very few events that are recorded in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's in all four Gospels. So it's a basic principle of Bible study that when something is repeated, it's probably important. Well, that's not just within a single passage. That's not just within a book. That's within the entirety of Scripture. And when you have a unit like the Gospels that all thematically revolve around the same thing, that they're relating to you a historical record of the ministry of Jesus, when you've got two sets within that group, the Synoptics and then John, that normally differ, but on this area, they all have to spend time on it. That should clue you in that Peter's denial of Jesus is a pretty important thing. Right? For all of the gospel authors to have included this. Alright? And if you want to know where you can find this passage in the other gospels, you can just make this as a note. I did not make slides for them, but I wanted to give you the references. You can find it in Matthew chapter 26, verses 69 through 75. 26, 69 through 75. That's in Matthew. If you want to find the account in Mark, it's in Mark chapter 14, verses 66 through 72. 14, 66 through 72. If you want to find it in Luke, it's in Luke chapter 22, verses 54 through 62. 54 through 62. And then, of course, in John, it's our text that we're covering today. Right? So it's in all four Gospels. So it's a significant event. I want to take some time just walking through the verses that we're looking at this morning, getting some details, and then we'll wrap it up by making some application at the end. Well, let's start just right here in verse 15, where we see Simon Peter follow Jesus. Make a little note of that. Just make a little note that our passage this morning begins with John telling y'all remember Peter's boldness at the Last Supper. Peter tells Jesus he's ready to go with him anywhere. Why can I not follow you now? I'm willing to go with you to prison and to death. I will, even if everybody else abandons you, I will not abandon you. So we start this passage, Simon Peter followed Jesus. And so did another disciple. Now, who this other disciple is up to debate. Now, some of you might be saying, wait a minute, what are you talking about? That's John, right? And you've got good reason for thinking that, because in a lot of places in the Gospel of John does this thing where he doesn't name himself. Okay? He usually refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved, or another disciple, or something like that, right? That's the traditional answer here, is that the other disciple is John himself, for these reasons, and a couple of more. But there are actually legitimate arguments that in this specific case, we could be talking about somebody else. For example, look at what John, as the author of this gospel, relates about this other disciple. That this other disciple was known to the high priest. Now, what does it mean that this disciple was known to the high priest? Well, if you look at what's happening, it says they get to the courtyard, right? He enters with Jesus, this other disciple does. He enters into the courtyard of the high priest, but Peter stood outside at the door, right? So the other disciple, in verse 16, the other disciple who was known to the high priest, you hear that mentioned twice? This other disciple is known to the high priest. This is important information. He goes out and speaks to the servant girl who kept watch at the door and brought Peter in. So whoever this other disciple is has got enough connections to the high priest that he can walk into the courtyard unquestioned. And then when Peter is kept outside, he can go back to the door and tell the servant girl, let this guy in, he's with me. And so you've got to ask the question, because remember, John was the youngest of the disciples. John was probably a mid to late teenager at this point. John dies in his 90s. Right? So John's probably a mid to late teen at this point. And yet, whoever this disciple is has got enough clout and he can walk out to the doorkeeper and say, let this guy in, he's with me. Would a teenager from Galilee have that kind of connection to the high priest in Jerusalem? I mean, I don't know what his family connections were. Right? But I do know that whoever it was had some serious resume fire if he could walk out the door of the high priest's house and tell security, let this guy in. He's with me. Right? I don't know if John could have done that. Right? On the other hand, there are strong arguments to be made that it is John. In just a minute, we're going to see that the description of what's going on in the courtyard has the ring of an eyewitness to it. Right? You can look at things like who's there, where they're standing, what kind of fire did they build, who said what. These are all eyewitness type pieces of information. So who do I know? I mean, what do I know? Maybe John did have these crazy connections. Maybe his family did have these connections to the high priest like that. Maybe the folks at the door did know who he was. I don't know. I don't think, however, it's particularly consequential beyond this he's with me moment. Right? Whoever this was, they were a disciple of Jesus, and apparently the doorkeeper seemed to know that. Because when the doorkeeper goes to Peter, she says, you also are not one of this man. You hear the also? Some English translations conveniently leave that out, even though the word kai, which means and or also, is there in Greek. Right? So whoever this other disciple is goes out in verse 16, speaks to the servant girl at the door who's keeping watch and brings Peter in. And the servant girl at the door said to Peter, you also are not one of this man's disciples, are you? Now, Greek grammar, which right? We're all reading in English, so we can't look at the Greek grammar. But Greek grammar, in some cases, can actually betray the thoughts of the person who's speaking. And let me explain what I mean. In English, we do this generally with inflection, right? So we communicate with somebody and we go, there's a very big difference in saying, you're one of his disciples. That's a statement. I can say the exact same sentence with no change in grammar and say, you're one of his disciples? All of a sudden now it's a question. Right? Like my inflection has changed the meaning of the words, even though grammatically I've changed nothing. We can't hear inflection, but Greek is unique in that sometimes the grammar actually tells you what the inflection was. And the way this girl is speaking, she uses a construction that tells you her assumed answer is no. So when she sees Peter come in, other disciple comes out and says, this guy's with me. What she ends up saying to him is she almost leans over to Peter and says, you're not one of his followers too, are you? She's assuming the answer is no. Like for him to say yes would have seemed ridiculous. So she almost gives Peter a layup. It was really, she already assumed the answer is no. So Peter just kind of goes with it. You're not one of his disciples too, are you? Nah. In the door. Right? She assumed the answer was going to be no. And then when Peter comes into the courtyard after his, and I mean, have you ever answered a question like that when somebody, they already assume an answer from you and you just go, nah, and you just move on. You don't think anything else of it. That's just a quick throwaway. Right. That's kind of what you get from Peter here, is that this servant girl assumes the answer is no, and Peter just lets her assume what she wants to think. He goes with it. Nah, in we go. And then we find ourselves in the courtyard. So let's start picking this apart and trying to figure out what all this means. I want to draw your attention to the fact that Peter led off with a lie. He began this entire saga in the courtyard with a lie. And this is not a biblical proverb, but I bet you can finish it. What a tangled web we weave when at first we practice to deceive. Peter leads off with a lie. And lies have this funny habit of begetting lies. Because you tell the lie, and then to keep the lie up, what do you have to do? You got to tell another lie. And sometimes it's not even verbal lies. Sometimes you have to take actions so that you appear consistent with the lie that you've told. And that's exactly the situation that Peter finds himself in. He lies to get a foot in the door. Literally. You're not one of his disciples too, are you? Nah. Now I'm in the courtyard. And I'm in the courtyard under the pretense that I am not also one of this man's disciples. Well, when he gets in the courtyard, what does he find? Well, in verse 18, the servants and the officers. This is the same bunch of folks who just arrested Jesus. You've got the servants of the high priest, and you've got the officers who went with them. The muscle, if you will. And what are they doing? They've made a charcoal fire. I know this is not what happened. But in my brain, the only image, like the image that this conjures up is one of them big old 50-gallon oil drums. The big metal ones. You know, I know they didn't have it. But that's what I imagine. They've got a big 50-gallon oil drum, and they got the fire in it. They're all standing around the courtyard. So if y'all want to join me in my anachronistic 50-gallon oil drum high priest courtyard, y'all come right on ahead. That's where we are. If you don't want that, then imagine some other fire pit. I don't know, maybe they got it from Sam's Club, but they built them a fire. All right? And they're standing around it. Well, Peter's come in. He's led with a lie. He's come into the courtyard. And here are all these guys that 30 minutes ago were taking Jesus out of the Garden of Gethsemane and are bringing him to the high priest's residence. Now, when Peter walks in the door, he's got two choices. He can either go and stand off to the side, or he can go join him at the fire. I think there's a couple of reasons he did go join him, I mean. One, John tells us, author John, whether he's the other disciple or not, because it was cold. The time of the year would have had it start getting nippy at night. So they're standing out there and they've decided if we're going to be here for a while, we may as well build us a fire to keep ourselves warm. So on the one hand, you've got physical comfort. That might be one reason Peter headed over there. But on the other, what a tangled web we weave. You've come in the door. You've denied that you're one of this man's disciples. So are you really going to draw attention to yourself? Are you really going to draw attention to yourself by standing off to the side? Because if you're the one guy who's not standing around the fire and you want to blend in, you don't want people to pay attention to you, you want to be inconsequential right when you're there. What's the best thing you can do if you wanted to draw attention to yourself? Stand over by yourself, right? Right, we played this game at camp a couple weeks ago called Sharks and Minnows. Anybody ever heard of this? You've got a line on each side of the field, and all the two people from both teams line up on one line. And then each team has one person in the middle who's the shark, everybody else is the minnow. And when the whistle blows, everybody runs from one side to the other and tries not to get caught by the shark. And at the end of however many rounds it takes, whichever team runs out of people first loses. Well, they didn't have enough campers, so they asked in that particular game at that particular time. So they asked Emily and me to play. Well, I'm not the fastest, most athletic guy, but I might be the goofiest. So I decided to play my own game within the game. And I decided I was going to see just how many times I could casually walk back and forth without them getting me. And you might think this is stupid. These kids are extremely athletic, and you are not. They're going to catch you immediately. I made it to the last round. Do you know why? They forgot I was playing. Because I just walked over to the edge of the field, and every time they blew the whistle, I just walked. I'd pull out my phone, I'd be looking at things on it while I was walking, and they're just playing this game over here to the side, and all the people who are out are watching me do this, and they're screaming at their sharks, "He is literally walking!" And they're like, "Yeah, but what's Pastor Josh doing?" They're like, "He's playing the game! You're just ignoring him." You know, it's actually, I can't remember who it was that told me this. If you're wearing a lab coat and carrying a clipboard and you are walking confidently, the odds are higher than not that you will be allowed to basically walk anywhere you want to go. Because you look like you're supposed to be there. And people just believe it. So this is Peter's casually walking across the field moment. I'm going to come stand by the fire because it's going to draw less attention to myself than if I stand over away. Right? So, while he's standing by the fire, now has he denied Jesus again just by standing by the fire? No. But who's surrounding the fire? These are the people who just arrested Jesus, right? Now, some of them don't have a dog in the fight. Some of them are just hired hands that are getting a paycheck and going and arresting the guy they don't know from how. For all they know, he is a nobody. For all they know, he's actually a troublemaker. They're just officials doing what they've been paid to do. But for the others, these are people who've been annoyed with Jesus for a really long time, and they've got designs. Okay. So Peter, he's standing around this campfire with these people. Do you think that this raises the likelihood that he's going to be in a situation to deny Jesus more? Yeah, absolutely. This doesn't guarantee his denial, but it puts him in a situation where denial could be expected. Right? The stakes continue to rise because finally the man who confronts Peter with his last denial is a relative of Malchus. Does anybody remember who Malchus is? Malchus was the servant of the high priest whose ear Peter chopped off. Malchus conspicuously is not there. Interestingly enough, he's in the garden to arrest Jesus. Peter chops his ear off. Peter miraculously puts it back on, and Malchus is done. He's not with this group. We can speculate as to why that might be, but I would probably suggest to you that Malchus had some things he had to think of. This is Malchus' relative. And apparently Malchus' relative was in the garden when Peter didn't go. Because he comes to Peter and he says, "Didn't I see you in the garden with him?" Well, now this is no longer just are you one of this man's disciples, but you're a close enough disciple that you're staying with this guy. You were with him when we arrested him, weren't you? And now this is no longer general self-preservation. This guy's about to find out that I chopped his cousin ear off. No! I was not with him. Cock-a-doodle-doo. And the rooster crows. Now the other Gospels provide other information, such as Jesus, at the time the rooster crows, he looks out at Peter and meets eyes with him. And Peter begins weeping violently and runs away. We have other information in the other Gospels, but in the Gospel of John, the story of Peter's denial ends there. I want us to look at a few applications for our personal lives and what we can see through this. And first and foremost, I want us to see that if you have to sin to get a foot in the door, that's not the kind of door you want to go. If the price of entry is denying Christ, if the price of entry is sin, that is not the kind of door you want to go through. And to make this point, I want to show you in the book of Psalms what I think is a perfect explanation of what Peter just experienced. Psalm chapter 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. All my Sunday school people, when y'all started Psalms this quarter, this was the first one you did. What? There's a reason that Psalm 1 is at the beginning of the book of Psalms. And it's because there is a progression to these kinds of things. If you notice, walks, you're moving, you're just passing by. Stands, I'm stopping, I'm lingering. Sitting, I've set up shop. I've gone from passing by to lingering and contemplating some more of it to sitting. Now I am in the midst of this, and this is where I have set up shop. Right? You're not one of this man's disciples too, are you? Nah, just passing. Stands. I'm going to put myself in the vicinity of these guys. Weren't you in the garden with him? Sits. No, I'm going to secure my place here at this fire. We begin at the passage with John saying, Simon Peter followed Jesus. We end the passage by saying he was with them, warming himself outside. He goes from following Jesus to warming himself by the fire with people. you arrested. Walk, stand, sit. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight's in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. See, Peter stopped meditating. He stopped thinking on what he was doing. He begins by reacting to the question. You're not one of his disciples too, are you? Really easy to just say no and not think about it. But now you're in this situation. And if you want to maintain your safety in this situation, what do? Well, now I've got to put myself in amongst these other people who are also in this place that I'm in, who also are here because they're not with Jesus. And then when I go put myself over there with them, if I'm going to fit with them, I've got to continue denying. I've stopped thinking about what Jesus has taught me, who he is, my commitment to him, and I've started thinking about self-preservation. This is what we talked about last week. Was Jesus' number one goal in the garden self-preservation? No, it was obedience. What's Peter's number one goal right now? Self-preservation. And you see where that leads? His delight's in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He's like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither, and all that he does, he prospers. Have you ever made a decision that ended up being a really bad decision, but all you could think of in the moments before you made it were the bad things that would happen to you if you didn't do it? I've got to do this, or I've got to say this, or I've got to take this position, or this will happen to me. I'll lose my job if I don't do this. I'll lose my friends if I don't do this. I'll lose my girlfriend or my boyfriend if I don't do this. I'll lose this if I don't do that. Say that. I'm not going to keep doing this. I'm not going to keep saying this. This is just a rough spot. It's a bump I've got to go over. And this is just to get my foot in the door. You know what happens after you get your foot in the door? You're in there. And is that a door you really want to go through if that's the cost of entry? Well, if I continue in what would be obedience, this bad thing will happen, and this bad thing will happen, and this bad thing will happen, and this bad thing will happen. Well, it's really funny because when I look at Psalm 1, it says the results of obedience are being like a tree planted by streams of water that yields fruit in season and its leaves don't wither, and in all that you do, you prosper. That's what Scripture says is the ultimate outcome of obedience. But see, Satan loves to prey on your human frailty. If you obey, you know what's going to happen. Peter, if you just out yourself, they're going to arrest you too. They're going to haul you in front of the high priest too. What are they going to do to you? What's going to happen to you if she already doesn't think you're one of his disciples? Just go with it. And so he does. Out of self-preservation. But here's the irony. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. You know what the best thing you can do for preserving yourself actually is? Sticking with Jesus. That's kind of what eternal life is, right? Can yourself get any more preserved than possessing eternal life? No. You know what chaff is? Chaff is the worthless part of the grain. There's nothing good about it. The way that they separate the wheat from the chaff is they would go out on the threshing floor when the wind was blowing, and they would grab all the grain with a pitchfork and throw it into the air. And when the wind is blowing, the chaff is so insubstantial that it just blows away and the grain falls back down the ground. You try and preserve yourself by compromising. You try and preserve yourself by giving in when really what you've done is you've made yourself insubstantial and pointless, and and you'll blow away the first gust of wind. He who tries to save his life will, and he who loses his life for my sake will. It's kind of what Jesus said, right? Try and preserve yourself, compromise to continue, and you won't. If you have to sin, get a foot in the door. If you have to lead with a lie to stand by the fire, is the fire worth everything necessary to secure a spot inside? If you have to sin to get a foot in the door, it is not a door worth going through. Second, it's never just a foot in the door. Sin always takes you farther than you want to go. Always takes you farther than you want to go. I don't think Peter had in his mind when he took that quick, breezy walk by the doorkeeper who assumed he wasn't one of Jesus' disciples. I don't assume when he threw out that, "Nah, I'm not one of them." I don't think he was thinking about a rooster crowing a few hours later. I don't think that was on his mind. I don't think he was thinking about the bitter weeping. I don't think he was thinking about locking eyes with Jesus. I don't think he was thinking about all of the pain of having failed. No, I don't think that was it. I think he intended to just get a foot in the door. But it's never just a foot in the door. It's always more than that. You might find yourself in a situation where you go, "You don't understand. There was no right decision. What's Peter supposed to do?" Right? Like, what is Peter supposed to do? He's in the courtyard. If he stands over here to the side, away from the people who came to get Jesus, they're going to single him out. And then he's in trouble. If he stands by the fire, they're going to be like, "Wait a minute, who of y'all knows this guy? Weren't you with her?" They're going to single him out there. There's no right decision for Peter to make. So what's Peter supposed to do if he's in a situation where there's no right thing to do? I'm going to ask you a question. How did Peter get in a situation where there was no right thing to do? He already lied at the door to get himself there, didn't he? He lied to get a foot in the door, and on the other side of that door was a situation in which there was no right decision. Let me tell you another story from the Bible that might point out what I'm talking about right here. 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 5 through 8. To give you some context, David is getting ready to bring the Ark of the Covenant back into the city. It's been out at the threshing floor because they were scared. It's been out and about, and it hasn't been where it's supposed to be. And David's getting ready to bring it back in. And so there's this huge, big celebration, and they're bringing the Ark back into the city. David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals and electric guitars and PA systems. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put out his hand to the Ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. Now, what are we talking about? Well, they were bringing the cart back into the city. They're bringing the Ark back into the city on the back of an ox cart. Well, the Ark's a pretty heavy thing, right? It's a big box, but it's been completely overlaid in gold. Gold is heavy. So they've taken this thing and put it on an ox cart. It was a nice ox cart. It's brand new. The oxen were good oxen. They put it in the Cadillac of semis to transport it. Nice ox cart, nice oxen. Only the best for God. But the oxen steps on a rock. And Uzzah, one of the attendants, I don't know why his mama named him that, but Uzzah, one of the attendants, sees the ox step on a rock and sees what's about to happen. And if y'all have ever seen Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, you don't want that thing. That's not what happened. But the last time anybody opened the ark in Israel, about 30,000 people died. Plus, it's just disrespectful You don't want the ark of God to fall on the ground. So Uzzah, out of respect, most likely, reaches up to steady the ark so that it doesn't fall. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the ark of God. And David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah, and that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. David got angry because the Lord broke out against Uzzah. What do you think was the motivation for David's anger? Well, it doesn't take much to figure out why he was frustrated, because what's Uzzah supposed to do? Once the ox steps on a rock and it stumbles, one of two things is going to happen. Either A, the ark is going to what? It's going to fall. We don't want that. B, Uzzah steadies the ark. The ark doesn't fall, but what happens to Uzzah? Uzzah dies. You look at a situation and you say, well, I get where David's coming from. Why did God strike him down? There was no good decision to make. Either Uzzah lets the ark fall, and who knows what happens, or Uzzah steadies the ark, and Uzzah dies. There's no good decision to make. Oh, well, no, there is no good decision to make. So you're saying this is a lose-lose situation? Yeah, at this point. You know how we got to this point? The ark was never supposed to be put on an ox cart in the first place. God gave specific rules for how the ark was to be transported. It is supposed to be carried by the poles on the side by the Levites in a very specific mode of transportation. It did not matter where it was going. It did not matter how long that distance was. If the ark is to be transported, this is how it's done. But that's going to take so long. Here's what we'll do. We'll put it on an ox cart, and it'll be a nice ox cart. And we'll get some really good oxen. And we'll have a big celebration. And there'll be tambourines and castanets and lutes and lyres. And we'll have a big celebration. And it'll be great. And God will love it. Here's the problem. You didn't start out the way God told you to. And so now when something goes south and you try and fix it, you go, wait a minute. There's no way for me to respond to this situation without sinning. Why is that? Because you got where you are because sin got you there in the first place. There is no guarantee that once you sin, there's going to be a good option afterward. There's no guarantee. What's Peter supposed to do? I'll tell you what Peter's supposed to do. Take it on the chin. If you're going the wrong direction, progress is not continuing to go forward. If you're going the wrong direction, progress is turning around and retracing your steps. Peter went the wrong direction when that girl said, "You're not one of his disciples, you are you?" And he said, "Nah." That was the first wrong decision. The correct way, and he may have had to deal with some consequences for this. The correct solution is to say, you know what? I wasn't entirely truthful that day. Yes, I am actually one of his disciples. That's the way out of this. Now, the way out might not mean the way out without suffering. But it's the way out in maintaining faithfulness. You say, well, it's not fair that God lets me get into a situation where there's no right way out. So what you want God to do is not let you make choices, huh? So God respects your choices. He lets you choose bad things. Otherwise, you're not really making choices, are you? Say, well, that's not fair. Of course it's fair. These kind of situations don't exist in vacuums. Uzzah had to stay in the ark because maintain safely his faith, because he put himself in a situation where he lied just to get into the courtyard. There was no good decision. Had Peter not lied at the door, he would have had no appearances to keep up. You wouldn't have to keep cooking the books if you didn't embezzle the first time. You wouldn't have to keep lying to your spouse if you didn't cheat the first time. You wouldn't have to keep clearing your history if you stopped looking at that stuff the first time. Right? Keeping up appearances, you have to keep them up because you started out with a false appearance. Well, there's no good way out of this. There's no comfortable way out of it. There's a good way. Tell the truth. But you don't know what I'll lose. And here's the thing, you lost it. You already suffered some loss whenever you got yourself in. I'm not talking about your salvation. You don't understand. If I come clean about this, do you know what so-and-so will think? Do you know what so-and-so will do? What will God think? Do you care what He thinks about the situation? What does He want you to do? Do you value having His approval more than everybody else's, or whatever it is that you're stuck in trying to maintain your grip on by lying, cheating, stealing? What is it that you're trying to hang on to that you value more than faithfulness to God? It's never just a foot in the door. Sin always takes you farther than you really want to go. And then finally, I added this. I don't think I put this on your handout. I thought of this morning. Genesis 12, 10 to 13. We'll read this to you, and we'll go quickly here. Because I just realized it's 12:02. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there. The famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarah, his wife, I know you're a woman, beautiful in appearance. And when the Egyptians see you, they'll say, this is his wife. Then they'll kill me, but they'll let you live. Say you're my sister. Guys, never do this. That it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. Have y'all ever read that story in your Bible where God miraculously provided for Abraham and gave him and his family food, even though there was a famine all around him? No, you've never read that story. You know why? Because it didn't happen. Whenever the famine hit, Abram said, I know God made all these promises to me, but you don't understand. There's no food anywhere. Ingalls is completely out of groceries. So I'm going to go into Egypt and find food there. But when I go there, Sarah, you're really pretty, and I don't want to die. So don't tell anybody that you're married to me so that, maybe they abduct you, but I'll live. How's that sound? She's like, you sure you're going to live? It might not be them who kills you. You know? You've never heard that story because Abraham didn't trust God to provide him food. Abraham trusted Egypt, so he went into Egypt. And then they abducted Sarah. And then God threatened Pharaoh's life. And then Pharaoh got mad at Abraham. And to placate Abraham and God, Pharaoh gave Abram lots of servants, male and female, one of whom was probably named Hagar, who ended up being a big problem later on because she had a son named Ishmael. Oh, Abraham provided for himself, all right. Sin takes you farther than you want to go. Finally, quickly, where did my heading go? My heading disappeared. It's better to be faithful and suffer than it is to compromise and remain comfortable. The author of Hebrews says this, because remember, Peter compromised. Recall the former days when after you were enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with suffering. sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction, and sometimes being partners with those so treated. For you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of the property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession, and an abiding one. Therefore do not throw away your confidence, which has great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised. For yet a little while, and the coming one will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith. And listen to this. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. Did you hear how much pleasure God has in souls? How much pleasure God has in the one who shrinks back? He said, my soul has no pleasure in the one who shrinks back. Well, I'll just one denial just to get in the door, and then I'll be faithful once I'm inside. That's not how it works. The author of Hebrews says, you guys have suffered already. You've suffered for your faith before. Everybody in here has probably been ridiculed or picked on at least one time because of your faith. And if you haven't, is it because people even know? God said, my soul has no pleasure in the one who shrinks back. There's never a good reason to deny Jesus. There's never a good reason to sin and compromise to get a foot in the door. But whatever it is you gain by doing that, I promise you it is not worth more than God taking pleasure